All right, joining me now from Taiwan, from Taipei, is the Asia correspondent for the Telegraph, Nicola Smith. Hi, Nicola. How are you doing there with, first of all, COVID-19?
Hi there, Dana. Yeah, we're doing great with COVID-19. Taiwan's been doing an excellent job in terms of combating the virus and not allowing it to come into Taiwan or to take hold here. So life is very normal.
So here in your home country of the United Kingdom,
Mm,
there's 65,000 excess deaths. One of
yeah,
the worst in Europe, one of the worst in the world. What did
yeah.
Taiwan get right that the UK got wrong?
Well, it's devastating how many deaths there have been in the UK. But I mean, Taiwan did everything right from the start. One of the reasons was because in 2003, when there was a SARS outbreak, they were hit badly. So they took that time to just prepare their pandemic plans and to put together a strategy to never allow that to happen. It helped that their vice president, at the time the pandemic started to take hold, was an epidemiologist. So he was an expert and an expert in government. So they really let their response be led by scientists, and politics didn't get involved. One of the first things they did was control the borders very, very carefully. First of all, restricting and monitoring flights from China. And then expanding that as the virus spread around the world. They had a great contact tracing system in place. They also had very strict quarantine and still do. So anyone coming into Taiwan, and people are only allowed in on a restricted basis, must go through 14 days of compulsory quarantine. So all of these things came together. They acted very early, very decisively, and now life is normal. Schools are open, and people are going out to restaurants, they're meeting their families, they're just living life, like before. We can't really travel very much without the quarantine, but life is good here.
All right, everybody's healthy. That's good to know. I want to talk to you about China and the threat of
Sure.
war. So they've got COVID-19 right. Do they have China policy right? And as we speak, in the weeks leading up to this, you've had warplanes from China crossing the median line of the Taiwan Strait, approaching in a threatening manner. Some pretty strong messages coming from China.
Definitely, and it seems to be part of moves by China generally this year to have a very robust foreign policy and quite an aggressive one around the world. It's not only Taiwan. But you asked if Taiwan has its China policy right. That's very hard to do, because fundamentally they're at loggerheads about the status of Taiwan, and there really can't be any compromise there. China has stated for decades that it believes that Taiwan is part of its territory, and Taiwan just disagrees. So there can't really be any agreement there. However,
do they in their hearts disagree? I mean, when you sit and talk to politicians and people who live in Taiwan, I mean, a lot of people felt, probably 10, 20, 30 years ago, when you do polling, a lot of people identify with China. Now there's this completely new generations of people who don't identify with China. They see what's happening in Hong Kong. They probably feel pretty distant from ever joining China.
Yes, absolutely. And I don't think it's just the younger generations. I mean, now when you look at the polls, the overwhelming majority would say that they identify as being Taiwanese. There's always a very small minority who would want who'd identify as Chinese, but that's just not. Taiwan has moved on, basically, and it's forged its own identity. It is de facto independent just now.
China hasn't moved on, and
absolutely not.
They really do believe it's inevitable that this wayward province, that's what they consider Taiwan, will rejoin either willingly or possibly through armed action. I mean, and it seems like now the leader of China is saying, we're not going to pass this to another generation and another generation. He wants to bring Taiwan into China.
Absolutely, and President Xi Jinping has made it very clear. He said in a speech last year that if Taiwan would not unify peacefully, that force was not off the table, and he's also made it a very personal part of his own legacy. He's one of the strongest presidents since Mao, and so for him it's personal, but it's also a very nationalistic cause in China as well. It's one of the unresolved issues of the Chinese Civil War in the 1940s. So you see this rise of nationalism in China, and taking back, well, it's not even taking back, Taiwan was never ruled by the Chinese Communist Party, but incorporating Taiwan into China is a very big national issue in China. It's not just the government. I think, a lot of the population's behind that sentiment as well.
So in Taiwan, they believe that they're going to stay independent. And how are they going to fend off China? Militarily?
Well, that's a good question, because, you've got Taiwan is it's a democratically run island of about 24 million people. It's, compared to this huge behemoth next door is this, China with over 1 billion people and a huge military force. So to fend off China militarily would be very difficult. And Taiwan does face a huge military threat of invasion and of China trying to take it by force. It couldn't fend off China alone. It would need support from the US and other regional and global allies. And so this is a very tense time for the Taiwanese. They know that they've seen what has happened in Hong Kong. It's a different situation in Hong Kong. You mentioned that earlier. But they have no intention of taking the offer of one country, two systems. Now they've seen how Beijing has just run roughshod over that. And so there is no easy or happy solution to the Taiwan question. The government of President Tsai Ing-wen has said that they want the status quo. They've offered to talk to Beijing to find some kind of solution, but Beijing has just completely cut ties with her government.
How do you read President Trump's administration? First of all, would they come to Taiwan's aid, and militarily, would they defend Taiwan? Let me ask you that first of all. What's the read on it there?
It's very hard to know exactly what the US would do. There are a number of factors at play. In a lot of ways, they've been very good for Taiwan, that they have shown a lot of support. They've sent 2 recent high-level visits to Taiwan, and that has boosted Taiwan's confidence. At the same time, in doing so, China has been riled, and that's raised tension. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword.
Nicola, do you read it, and others there, do people read it as Trump being supportive of Taiwan, or do they read it as sort of short-term, low-horizon policy by the Trump administration, where they're just trying to irritate China because they have all sorts of trade issues with them and other issues with them?
Well, it's hard to take the US election completely out of the equation. But generally, I think people do feel supported by the Trump administration, and there's a little bit of nervousness about a Biden administration coming in and being weaker on China. But I don't think necessarily that people trust President Trump himself. It's more the people who are working for him, and also Senate and friends in Senate and Congress that has representatives that there is a very strong Taiwan lobby in the US, and that has grown in recent years, and there's a lot of support for President Tsai. So when it comes to military action, nobody's quite clear what the US would do. It would depend, first of all, what China does, if it's a full-scale invasion across the beaches, or whether they choose to try to take over some of Taiwan's outlying islands, or they go ahead with a blockade or a cyber attack. It would depend on, first of all, on China's actions. But the US it has given Taiwan commitments towards its security, but these commitments haven't been explicit in terms of action and what they would do if there was a full-scale invasion. So that is a big question hanging over Taiwan's future, and nobody really knows the answer at the moment.
Is Nicola Smith allowed to be the Asia correspondent, or is she allowed to leave the country right now? Are her editors back at the Telegraph saying you can't leave, you better stay because things are that hot right
Um, Not yet, no. I mean, I think at the moment we are, it'd be very difficult to leave because of COVID-19, but I think at the moment people are more nervous about the period between the US election and the inauguration, that 4 months in between, when it could, if there is some kind of discord in the US, and everyone else is so distracted by the pandemic, that President Xi could see a window of opportunity there to take action against Taiwan. And if you don't have a strong leadership in the US at that point, then that could be very detrimental to Taiwan's interests. So I think that there's certainly some nervousness just now in Taiwan with the number of military sorties that China's been sending over the past few weeks, and certainly over the past few days it's escalated again. So people are starting to wonder about what is going to happen and how they're going to deal with it. But the biggest concern is about that time in the US, that 4 months where we're not quite sure what the presidency will hold.
Is there a perception that an incoming Democrat President Biden would be soft on China, or it's just a big question mark? People don't really understand how he would react.
I think there's
there was an incoming president on the Democrat side, if Biden were to win, and that's a bigger question mark.
People, yes, there is a question mark. I mean, I think generally people are a bit more wary or unsure about Biden, about how he might react. I mean, at the same time, there is unpredictability about Trump because, you know, ultimately he hasn't got rid of that businessman image where he could very well trade off Taiwan as some kind of pawn to get something else out of Xi Jinping. So there are concerns on both sides, regardless of who comes in. I think, though, for the US, it would be very difficult to give up Taiwan. It would be very difficult not to step in, not least because of Taiwan's strategic importance to the US and to the rest of the region and the world. And currently, you know, it is part of this first island chain that goes from the Russian coast down to the Malay Peninsula. And if China was to take over Taiwan, it would get a Pacific coastline, which would be a huge problem for the US and its Indo-Pacific strategy. And it would allow China to dock submarines and launch them off the coast of Taiwan. So there's a military and security concern for the US. Taiwan is also a huge semiconductor producer, so you know they would not want China to control that supply chain. So there are a lot of reasons why it's in the US's interests to defend Taiwan, and I personally can't see why that would be much different under a Biden presidency as compared to a Trump presidency.
Just the last question, just to kind of end where we started in terms of Taiwan, and that is, maybe the answer is obvious, but why is China being so aggressive in the last few weeks, in the last few months? Is it because of the arms sales and the diplomatic visits by Americans? Is it just that, or do they see a window now of you know, if they're going to press Taiwan, now is the time to do it? And is it a bluff, or do you read it otherwise?
I mean, I think it's the reasons you suggested. It's a bit of both, really. I mean, it certainly has. China has escalated its actions in recent weeks because of growing ties between the US and Taiwan, with the arms sales and the visits. That has certainly triggered China. At the same time, China always has had Taiwan in its sights. You know, it's a strategy, and it's a red line that it's always going to go. Oh, did I lose there? It's a strategy that it's not going to give up, and it always has the intention of taking over Taiwan by peaceful means or by force. So I think that regardless of what the US does, China is going to escalate its actions. And it's also part of Xi Jinping's wider strategy. This year, no one's quite sure why he's being very aggressive towards India, and towards China. Is also taking it's really shifted its relations with countries like Australia. And so there is a lot of speculation, and no one really knows if this is true, but there's a lot of speculation that many of these very hardline foreign policy actions have been motivated by President Xi trying to distract the domestic audience from some serious domestic problems with the economy, with the coronavirus, with severe flooding this summer. That this is a classic foreign policy move, is to just distract the audience at home and show yourself to be strong abroad.
Nicola Smith, the Asia correspondent with The Telegraph. Great to talk to you.
You too. Thank you.